The role of the Educational Trust is just one of the reasons why we thought Victor Pasmore was the perfect choice for an exhibition. Besides the great effect he had on the teaching of fine art in this country, it was his enduring interest in the landscape and also architecture, which chimes perfectly with the unique setting that we can offer at Roche. And of course, Pasmore made the most beautiful and intriguing work throughout his career, which still enthralls today, and we feel very, very proud to have the exhibition here. I'm also proud to welcome Greville Worthington, who's going to open the exhibition for us. Greville has been, as he will explain, a long enthusiast of Pasmore's, and also a supporter of the restoration of the pavilion at Peterlee. Thank you, Greville.
Well, thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Madeline, for inviting me. It's an enormous pleasure to be here. It's one of my favourite places, and undoubtedly one of the great places to see sculpture in the outdoors. It's very nice to be in the south because I'm from the north, and I live in Yorkshire at the moment, but I did spend my first 14 years in Northumberland in a large house which was quite cold and quite lonely, and it had a nursery wing in it, and I didn't see very much of my parents and was brought up by a nanny who was one of the really last of the great Edwardian nannies. My life in Northumberland for the first 14 years was a bit odd. I mean, we all have had odd childhoods, and with excitements and boredoms and fun times and dull times, and mine, I dare say, was no different. But my parents used to shuffle off in the summer holidays for weeks and weeks on end, and I was left with my nanny, and my nanny used to take me to Peterlee, where life was a great deal more fun than hanging around in a cold, draughty house in Northumberland. Life in Peterlee was really tremendously exciting in the 60s and early 70s. I remember enormous fun games of cricket in the winter and football in the summer, played on the streets. And also, it was awash with mods and rockers. There were more mods than rockers, and often people were taking to bits their scooter engines on kitchen tables. And I also remember on the same day having my first cigarette and kissing a girl on the lips on the same day in the early 70s. And I also remember probably my only flirting with gang culture happened in Peterlee, because one teamed up with lots of people from the surrounding streets and went rampaging around. And, of course, the place where we gathered and met, which was a place which was designed for gathering and meeting, was the Sonny Blunt's housing estate and the Apollo Pavilion, which was designed by Victor Pasmore. Pasmore's involvement in Peterlee he was first asked to become involved in 1955 and was finally left it in 1977. So during that quite extensive time, he was fully involved in developing houses and then building this really extraordinary viewing platform. And so I really appreciated the experience that gave me. And I remember my father saying, "What on earth do you do all those weeks that you were in Peterlee?" And I found it difficult to explain some of the things that I'd been up to, including, I remember, playing hide and seek and hiding in the coal shed, trying to literally get under the coal to hide myself. But I do remember saying to him, well, I did find a tremendous sense of freedom there. And I was recently reading Peter Fuller's interview with Victor Pasmore before he died. And Pasmore talks about this sense of spatial freedom, which I think is absolutely critical. And so I really see myself as one of the sort of beneficiaries of that primary sense of space. And I really was enthralled by it, enjoyed it, and have never forgotten it. And as the looking after the pavilion passed from the Peterlee Corporation to the Easington Council in the early 80s, it really signalled a sharp decline in the Apollo Pavilion. And it did have a very rocky history, and I kept in touch with it as best I could. And I remember in 1982, when the steps to the pavilion were closed as I was heading off to university, so you could no longer access the viewing platform of it, I remember thinking that this was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. And then there was a concerted effort throughout the 90s to blow it up, and those words were actually used by the Northern Echo. It was called the Let's Blow Up the Apollo Pavilion campaign. And one of the neighbours who was sort of spearheading this campaign described the Apollo Pavilion as lumps of dirty, slimy concrete, and that's how bad it really got. But thankfully, it failed to get listed in the 90s, and then in June 2008 it received a Heritage Lottery grant to be able to restore it, and so it now is really displaying its former glory and is a really fantastic place to go and visit. My connections with it since it was in a very bad state of repair have been numerous. I remember seeing the Jane and Louise Wilson exhibition at the Baltic, which exclusively focused on the Apollo Pavilion, and they described how much time they'd spent there. And being the same age as them, I often wondered whether Jane or Louise Wilson might have been the girl I kissed, lurking around the Apollo Pavilion. I also remember being asked by East International to look after a Canadian photographer called Howard Ursulitz to go and photograph it, and I picked him up from Darlington Station and drove him out there when it was really in a pretty shocking state, and I realised how torturous it can be being a photographer, because we were there for an entire day in November and I had nothing to do but sort of look after him, and then he described his practice as photographing brutalist monuments and architecture, and I thought this was really a misrepresentation of this beautiful pavilion, despite the fact it looked in pretty treacherous condition. Now that it's restored, I've taken a number of people there. I remember taking Langlands and Bell there quite recently, and we always try to have these days where we see two architecture experiences on the same day, and on that day we did the Apollo Pavilion and Durham Cathedral, which as two quite close by architectural experiences. It was a pretty amazing day. So I really thank Victor Pasmore for that was the sort of helium balloon that lifted me up as a child and made me realise there was more to life than the stoic country house life, and dropped me onto the learning curve of contemporary art. And so I really bless the work that he did there, and really think it's the most amazing contribution to post-war art. And I think that's the reason why I'm here today. So thank you very much. It's a great pleasure.
Thank you, Greville. I think we'll all look at the pavilion, and perhaps you, in a different light now.